sitting here talking, I'm talking, you're listening. And we were all eating food a little while before. Humans are agents. We do things, like the cookies and the coffee that you sit listening, doing. That's frank teleological talk. Okay, we're supposed to do that, scientific. Too goddamn bad. We're agents, we really are. Okay? Now the question becomes the following, and I could go into a long disquisition on teleological talk, but it is teleological. If human agents are agents, nothing is agents. They're agents. So I asked myself, what's the simple? I now like to tell a cute story about my dog Windsor, who died recently. And Windsor was an agent, so I will tell you. I know Windsor was an agent because I would let out at night pee, and it was cold, and I'd say, and Windsor would be sniffing in the bush, and I'd say, "Come, Windsor," and I get this sidelong glance, you know, and the sidelong glance was, "Time here," and then back to sniffing, and I'd say, "Windsor, come," and he'd look at me and he'd say, "No, I still got time here," and he'd go back to sniffing. Finally, I'd really get annoyed, and I'd say, "Windsor, come," and you just sort of say, "Okay," he'd come over. Do I think Windsor read me exactly, accurately? Of course he did. I understand human emotions. We've been one another for 10,000 years and selected them to do it. Windsor knew perfectly well what my attitude towards him was, and he wanted to sniff the bushes. That's what Windsor wanted to do. So Windsor was an agent. He also liked to drive my car. He tended to look out the side window, so he wasn't the safest car driver, but he was really kind of cool up on my lap, you know, looking up the side. So the question is, what's the simplest system that you can imagine that might be an agent? Well, what about a bacterium swimming up glucose gradient? I'm willing to stretch teleological language. I wouldn't say that a rock rolling down a bowl is acting or doing, neither would you, but you might just be willing to say that the bacterium is swimming up the glucose gradient to get food. In fact, biologists talk that way all the time. I know I'm using teleological language. I'm going to stretch it to its limits. My third book, Investigations, examines the question, what's the minimum physical system that can be an agent? I think the answer is it has to be reproducing, and I think it has to do a thermodynamic work cycle, like a railroad train or a refrigerator. Okay? And it's interesting, and it takes you in the weirdest direction, some of which we're going to get to. But let's say I'm right. I may have stumbled across a definition of life. All living cells are reproducing and do work cycles. Okay, so I just may have stumbled, but I wouldn't insist on that. I mean, somebody will. It's even worse than saying sacred. Okay, to tell biologists that you have a definition of life is libelous and lethal. Okay, I kind of think I do though. Okay. But anyway, so this is important because with agency, wherever it came, whether it's with my minimal agent, whether it's with a bacterium or with my dog or us, doing enters the universe. Okay, there's no doing in physics. There's doing with agents. Doing is also a subset of what happens, just like the pumping of the heart. If you go to the grocery store, the particular way you go to the grocery store is immaterial. You went to the grocery store, right? So it's a subset of the events that constitutes the action. For the bacterium, I don't want to invoke consciousness. We'll get to, I won't talk about consciousness, but that gets into all the issues about consciousness and what consciousness is and free will and responsible free will, all of which are very hard problems. But that's just agency for bacteria or for Windsor. So now doing and you see for the bacterium, glucose is either good or bad. Not for a rock, but for, I'm willing to say that for the bacterium, glucose has value. So value has entered the world. Something else has entered the world. Do you all know David Hume's naturalistic fallacy? Yeah, some of you do and don't. So Hume was a famous Scottish Enlightenment skeptic philosopher, 1776, when something was happening down in the States that you all know about. And Hume said, roughly around then, you cannot deduce ought from is. You cannot deduce from what is the case to what ought to be the case. This has silenced scientists for 200 years. We're not supposed to make moral statements. We're supposed to just find out the fact and then leave it up to the politicians like George Bush to tell us what we should do with it. And I like to tell George Bush what to do with it, which is sort of a tradition. Okay? Hume's right. You can't deduce ought from is, but you can't deduce biology from physics, and that's the part that Hume missed. Once you have life, you have agency, or very close to it at the start. And once you've got agency, you've got doing, and you've got value. And once you've got value, like it or not, you've got ought. Ought enters the universe once values and doing enter the universe. Do we have values and doings and oughts? You bet. We were arguing about it back there, about oughts and morals before. Do we settle moral arguments by reference only to what is? No. That's not what moral discussion is about. Moral discussion is about what we know perfectly well what moral discussion is about. So, do we need God to get morals? No. Meanwhile, in part our morality has evolved. So chimps show morality. They also kill one another in utterly bestial ways, but then we do too. Okay? But there's a lovely experiment, I guess it's actually done with capuchin monkeys. So you take two capuchin monkeys and put them in cages facing one another, with a board between them, and a third one that can observe the first two. And the experimenter gives lovely food to one of the capuchin monkeys and just crumbs to the second one. And the third one's watching what's going on. Then you give the third one, who you feed normally, some extra food. Guess what the capuchin monkey does, the observing monkey? Gives the food to the capuchin monkey that got the crumbs. Isn't that neat? The rudiments of our morals have evolved. And they've evolved because people who've argued in favor of group selection are at least partially right. Along these lines, I'll just mention to you, there's two famous ethical theories since Hume. One is Kant, who says, act so that the maximum of your action can be universalized. So it's right to tell the truth, because if everybody tells the truth, it works, but it's no good to lie, because if everybody lied, there's no point in lying. It's an absolutely brilliant try. And here's the counter-argument. You're sitting at home, this is for the men in the room, and a killer comes in and says, is your wife asleep in the bedroom? And she is. According to Kant, what you're supposed to do is tell the truth. Well, most of us would say, what?
Like all this stuff.